Love Has No Walls, the conflict and compromise for LGBT rights. During the late 1900s, anti-LGBT legislation ran rampant. Hundreds of people were harassed, assaulted, and arrested because of their refusal to compromise who they were. Their anger sparked conflict, but conflict over a long period of time can bloom into resolution. This is the story of these people, their actions and decisions, and how it all led to today, the bill legalizing gay marriage. There are various attempts at deterring the LGBT community, but Stonewall truly motivated the battle for LGBT rights. The Stonewall Riots began when the New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay club located in Greenwich Village in New York City. The solicitation of homosexual relations was illegal in New York City. The police hauled bar patrons and employees out of the bar, which led to 6 days of protest and fights with law enforcement outside of the bar on Christopher Street and on nearby streets, as well as Christopher Park. A criminal statute existed that allowed police to arrest people wearing less than 3 gender-appropriate articles of clothing. Gay bars were a type of safe haven for those who felt oppressed, yet the New York State Liquor Authority penalized and shut down establishments that served alcohol to known or suspected LGBT individuals, arguing that the mere gathering of homosexuals was disorderly. Later, the Genovese crime family would buy the Stonewall Inn in 1966 as a straight bar and renovate it, and then open it in the next year as a gay bar. To have the activities occurring in the club ignored, the family bribed the 6th police precinct and blackmailed the wealthier patrons of the club who wanted to keep their sexuality a secret. The bar, being seen as taboo under the law, was normally tipped off about raids, but on the morning of June 28, 1969, it wasn't. The NYC police arrested 13 people violating the state's gender-appropriate clothing statute. Angry patrons and neighborhood residents gathered outside of the Stonewall Inn and became increasingly agitated as people were manhandled. Within minutes, a full-blown riot broke out involving hundreds of people. After it started, some police and prisoners barricaded themselves inside the bar, and the mob in turn tried to set it on fire. The fire department eventually doused the flames and the riot squad dispersed the crowds. However, the protest, involving thousands of people, continued for 5 days. The riots that occurred that week inspired many people that supported gay rights to participate in a manifold of activities to help rid the world of unequal treatment in the LGBT community. The Stonewall Riots would not have been able to happen without the resistance and persistence of many individuals. These people were made up of drag queens, lesbians, gay men, trans men, and women who all came together and formed an unbreakable bond to fight against injustice, the one denominator tying them all together being love. Many of them even know each other. Previous Stonewallers have formed a group called the Stonewall Veterans Association, in which they tell their stories, connect, and relive their trials of the past so this particular group of minorities' history won't be forgotten. To name just a few of these individuals, Martin Boyce, Raymond Castro, Danny Garvin, William Henderson, Jerry Hughes, Marsha P. Johnson, Carl J. Keller Jr., Leigh McManus, John O'Brien, Electra O'Meara, Yvonne Ritter, Sylvia Rivera, Craig Rodwell, Fred Sargent, Martha Shelley, Howard Smith, Lucien Truscott, Terry Van Dyke, Dave West, and Dork Wilson. And though none of these individual sacrifices is any greater than the other, we are going to go into depth about 2 particular heroes and their struggles. Marsha P. Johnson was a trans woman during the time of the riots. She was a main face of the LGBT community and was constantly seen at the gay bars and clubs. Her persona was a main part of the culture and nightlife of these establishments. She was at the Stonewall Inn during the riots. Many eyewitnesses said they saw her instigating and fighting. After the riots, she and her friend, Sylvia Rivera, made the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, STAR for short. This was a very active organization that started and acted out many protests, fundraisers, and events for the LGBT community. Marsha was loved by all and did many things with her life. She was even a model for the pop artist Andy Warhol. Sadly, though, her body was found in the Hudson River in 1962. During that time, the police officers deemed it a suicide. However, though, the case was later reopened and deemed a homicide. Many foundations were made for Marsha, for her life in itself was a beacon for other individuals to fight against injustice.
The Mattachine Society was an LGBT activist group that had existed since the 1950s, but it wasn't until after the Stonewall Riots that the Mattachine received true recognition. It performed its annual picketing in front of the Independence Hall in Philadelphia on July 4, 1969, as a way to support gay rights. This picketing, also known as the Annual Reminder, gained more press attention than any of their previous marches. A participant by the name of Lily Vinces recalled from that day, "It was clear that things were changing. People who felt oppressed now felt empowered." The Stonewall Riots also had a claim on the daily news. Activists began a citywide newspaper called Gay. They considered it necessary because the most liberal publication in the city of New York at the time, the Village Voice, refused to print the word gay in the Gay Liberation Front's advertisements. There were a total of 3 newspapers established within a short period of time after the Stonewall Uprising: Gay, Come Out, and Gay Power. Within a short amount of time, these periodicals had gained between 20K and 25K readers. They were created to promote gay and lesbian rights, and also spread awareness for the lack of equality among those with different sexualities. And they succeeded. The Gay Liberation Front was the first gay organization to use gay in its name. And then came the Gay Activist Alliance, the GAA, which formed following the riots. The Gay Liberation Front originally replaced the activist group known as the Mattachine Society, but it was soon exchanged for the other, the Gay Activist Alliance. This was the result of the chaotic fallout that was the former Gay Liberation Front. People were discouraged that the meetings weren't fully focused on gay issues. The GAA, however, held meetings that were much more prolonged and that focused on impact, more than the groups created previous to the Stonewall era. The constitution of the GAA begins with, "We, as liberated homosexual activists, demand the freedom for expression of our dignity and value as human beings." The organization also came up with a clever way of forcing a politician to acknowledge gay and lesbian rights. This was called zapping. A few months later, a commemorative march took place in New York, as well as similar marches across the U.S. Christopher Street Liberation Day took place on June 8, 1970, the annual marking for the Stonewall Riots. It was the first LGBTQ pride march in U.S. history. Thousands marched from Christopher Park to Central Park, covering 51 blocks in New York. On that day, there were also marches in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago. As the years passed, more and more places began to participate in these parades, and they still continue to expand further to this day. They inspired a precedent for annual celebrations around the world towards the end of June to mark the Stonewall Riots. A plethora of bills were created in 2016 that would allow unequal treatment to those in the LGBT community. Religion began to be used as a loophole for anti-LGBT practices, and religious exemption legislation swept across the nation. Many who were not in support of the LGBT community would plead their First Amendment right was being violated, claiming that the government was prohibiting free exercise of their religious beliefs.
Obergefell v. Hodges was a landmark civil rights case that led to the ruling of same-sex marriage being seen as equal. James Obergefell and other plaintiffs argued in their case that the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause were violated from the 14th Amendment, and that the 14th Amendment requires a state license a marriage between two people of the same sex, and to also recognize a marriage between two people of the same sex when their marriage was lawfully licensed and performed out of state. The trial court of this case was in favor of all of the plaintiffs, and when the Justice Anthony M. Kennedy delivered the opinion for the 5-4 majority ruling, it was a victory for James Obergefell and other plaintiffs, because the court had ruled that the 14th Amendment had been violated, and same-sex marriage was now made legal throughout the United States. On June 26, 2015, Barack Obama announced that the Supreme Court had realized that the Constitution ruled same-sex marriage to be seen as equal. President Obama had also brought out James Obergefell, the main plaintiff in the Supreme Court marriage case, and said the following to him: "Your leadership on this, has changed the country. I couldn't be prouder of you and your husband." Vice President Joe Biden had also been a vocal supporter of gay marriage, and he said that day that gay and lesbian couples share a love for their partners constrained only by social stigma and discriminatory laws. But today, their love is set free with the right to marry and the recognition of that marriage throughout the country. President Obama had also sent out a powerful tweet on that day, June 26th, stating, "Today is a big step in our march toward equality. Gay and lesbian couples now have the right to marry just like anyone else. #LoveWins." The hashtag went viral. President Obama's speech on same-sex marriage mentioned, "Our nation was founded on a bedrock principle that we were all created equal. The project of each generation is to bridge the meaning of those founding words with the realities of changing times." People who endured the bullying and taunts stayed strong and came to believe in themselves and who they were, and slowly made an entire nation realize that love is love.